ZYX Wrath had seen terror before. As a field researcher for the Galactic Council, he had witnessed the devastating aftermath of stellar collapses, watched entire civilizations crumble under the weight of their own ambitions, and observed the methodical efficiency of the dreaded Void Hunters as they consumed entire star systems. Yet nothing in his 3 centuries of experience across 47 different worlds had prepared him for what he would discover among the humans. The assignment had seemed routine when it arrived through the encrypted channels of the Council's research division. Earth Designation Sol 3 had recently achieved faster-than-light travel and made contact with the greater galactic community. As was standard protocol for newly discovered sentient species, a comprehensive behavioral analysis was required before they could be granted full membership in the Galactic Council. ZYX Wrath's credentials were impeccable. His doctoral thesis on predatory behavioral patterns in pre-spaceflight civilizations had become required reading at the Galactic Institute. His work on the aggressive Krillian Empire had helped the Council develop successful diplomatic strategies that prevented what many believed would have been a devastating galactic war. The humans, according to preliminary reports, seemed relatively peaceful compared to the Krillians. How difficult could this assignment be? The journey to Earth took 3 standard weeks aboard the research vessel Luminous Inquiry. During the trip, ZYX Wrath reviewed the available data on humanity. The species had only recently emerged from what they called their world wars, a series of global conflicts that had claimed millions of lives. This was concerning but not unprecedented. Many species went through similar growing pains before achieving interstellar travel. What struck him as unusual was the speed of their technological advancement. Most species took millennia to progress from basic agriculture to spaceflight. Humans had accomplished this in mere centuries. Their rate of innovation was staggering, almost reckless. They seemed to throw themselves at problems with a combination of creativity and sheer determination that bordered on the irrational. The ship's computer had compiled a comprehensive database of human cultural artifacts, their literature, music, art, and historical records. ZYX Wrath spent hours studying these materials, trying to understand the human psyche. Their fiction was particularly revealing. Stories of heroes facing impossible odds, tales of sacrifice for the greater good, narratives that glorified struggle and perseverance in the face of overwhelming adversity. Curious, he had noted in his preliminary observations. They seemed to romanticize conflict and hardship. This could indicate deep-seated aggressive tendencies masked by their apparent civilization. When the Luminous Inquiry finally entered Earth's solar system, ZYX Wrath was struck by the organized chaos of human space traffic. Hundreds of vessels moved between Earth and its moon. Massive construction projects stretched across the void, and the entire system buzzed with activity. It was like watching an anthill, but on a cosmic scale. The humans had been expecting him. The Galactic Council had arranged for his arrival through proper diplomatic channels. A sleek human vessel approached the Luminous Inquiry as it entered Earth's orbital space. The communication that followed was cordial, professional, and utterly ordinary. Research Vessel Luminous Inquiry. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force vessel New Horizon. Welcome to Earth space. We've been authorized to escort you to Luna Station for your meeting with the Human Integration Committee. Luna Station was an impressive structure orbiting Earth's moon. The humans had built it in just 5 years since first contact with the galactic community. Most species took decades to construct such facilities. The station's design was functional rather than elegant, built with the practical efficiency that seemed to characterize human engineering. Dr. Elena Vasquez, head of the Human Integration Committee, greeted ZYX Wrath personally when he docked to the station. She was a small woman by human standards, perhaps in her 4th decade of life, with graying hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She wore the simple blue uniform of the Human Space Administration, with minimal decoration save for a small pin bearing the image of Earth. Dr. ZYX Wrath, welcome to Luna Station, she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. We're honored to have such a distinguished researcher studying our species. I hope you'll find your time among us enlightening. There was something in her tone, a subtle undercurrent that ZYX Wrath couldn't quite identify. Not hostility exactly, but perhaps wariness, as if she knew something he didn't. The committee had prepared extensive documentation for his review. Historical records, cultural studies, psychological profiles, even classified military reports that they claimed would help him understand humanity's recent conflicts. They were being remarkably transparent, more so than most species during first contact protocols. "We believe in honesty," Dr. Vasquez explained as she led him to his assigned quarters. "If we're to join the galactic community, it's important that you understand who we truly are. Not just our achievements, but our failures as well. Our capacity for both creation and destruction." ZYX Wrath's quarters were spacious and comfortable, designed to accommodate his species' particular needs. The gravity was adjusted to match his homeworld, the atmosphere was properly filtered, and the lighting was set to the spectrum he found most comfortable. The attention to detail was impressive and thoughtful. Over the following days, ZYX Wrath conducted interviews with dozens of humans from various walks of life. Scientists, artists, military personnel, farmers, teachers, engineers. He spoke with representatives from every major human profession and cultural group. What emerged was a picture of a species that was simultaneously inspiring and troubling. Humans, he discovered, were capable of extraordinary compassion. They regularly sacrificed their own welfare for the benefit of others, even strangers. Their history was filled with individuals who had given their lives to save people they had never met. They organized massive relief efforts for natural disasters, developed medical treatments they freely shared with other nations, and seemed driven by an almost compulsive need to help those less fortunate. But this same compassion coexisted with a capacity for violence that was breathtaking in its scope and creativity. Their wars weren't just about territory or resources. They fought over ideas, beliefs, concepts that had no material form. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet multiple times over, and they had come terrifyingly close to using them. "The thing about humans," explained Colonel James Morrison, a grizzled military veteran whom ZYX Wrath interviewed on his 5th day, "is that we don't do anything halfway. When we love completely. When we hate, that hate can consume everything. When we're scared, we'll do whatever it takes to eliminate the threat, no matter the cost." Morrison had served in what humans called the Third World War, a brief but devastating conflict that had erupted just years before first contact with the galactic community. The war had lasted only 6 months, but in that time, entire cities had been reduced to glass, and over 50 million humans had died. "We've been on the brink of nuclear war for decades," Morrison continued, staring out at the Earth through the station's viewport. "Everyone knew it was coming. The only question was who would pull the trigger first. When it finally happened, when the first missiles flew, something changed in all of us." ZYX Wrath leaned forward, his researcher's instincts engaged. "Change how?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "We realized what we were about to lose. Not just our lives, but everything we'd built, everything we'd learned, everyone we loved. And in that moment of absolute terror, when we were staring into the abyss of our own extinction, we did something that surprised even us." "What did you do?" "We stopped. Not gradually. Not through negotiation or treaties or diplomatic intervention. We just stopped. Every nuclear power on Earth simultaneously powered down their weapons. Not because we'd achieved peace, but because we finally understood what war really meant for a species like us." The Colonel's words stayed with ZYX Wrath as he continued his research. The more he learned about humans, the more contradictory they seemed. They were a species that had evolved from predators, yet they regularly risked their lives to save other species. They were capable of devastating violence, yet they wrote poetry about the beauty of flowers. They had nearly destroyed themselves with weapons of unimaginable power, yet they had also created art and music that moved him to what he could only describe as aesthetic ecstasy. It was during his second week on Luna Station that HFY first witnessed what he would later come to understand as humanity's true nature. The event itself seemed minor at first, an alarm sounding throughout the station, followed by an announcement from the command center. Attention, all personnel. We have received a distress signal from the mining ship Endeavour in the asteroid belt. The vessel has suffered a catastrophic engine failure and is drifting in an unstable orbit around asteroid TK 421. Rescue operations are being coordinated now. HFY was in the station's observation lounge when the announcement came through. Around him, the humans stopped what they were doing and turned toward the nearest communication panels. Within minutes, every human on the station was either directly involved in the rescue operation or was supporting it in some way. What followed was a display of coordination and efficiency that left HFY speechless. The humans didn't hesitate, didn't debate the wisdom of the rescue attempt, didn't calculate the cost-benefit ratio of risking more lives to save the Endeavour's crew. They simply acted with a speed and decisiveness that defied logical explanation. Dr. Vasquez appeared at his side as they watched rescue ships launching from the station's docking bays. 17 people on that mining ship, she said quietly. 17 humans who are about to die unless we do something about it. The rescue attempt is extremely dangerous, HFY observed. The asteroid field is unstable, the Endeavour's orbit is decaying rapidly, and your rescue ships will have a very narrow window to complete the operation. The logical choice would be to mourn the loss and learn from the accident. Dr. Vasquez turned to look at him, and for a moment, HFY saw something in her eyes that made him take an involuntary step backward. It wasn't anger, exactly, or even disagreement. It was something far more profound and unsettling. Dr. HFY, she said, her voice perfectly calm, there are some things that are more important than logic. 17 humans are going to die unless we save them. That's not a calculation to be made. That's a reality to be changed. The rescue operation took 14 hours. HFY watched from the command center as human pilots navigated through one of the most treacherous stellar environments he had ever seen. The asteroid field was a maze of spinning rocks, some the size of mountains, others no bigger than ground cars, all moving in unpredictable patterns as gravitational forces shifted and changed. The Endeavour was trapped between two massive asteroids, its hull breached in 3 places, its life support systems failing. The rescue ships had to thread the needle between the asteroids, dock with a crippled vessel, and extract 17 people while avoiding collision with debris that could destroy them all. Any reasonable species would have declared the mission impossible. The Krillians would have written off the crew as acceptable losses. The peaceful Valdorians would have held a ceremony to honor the dead. The pragmatic Zephyrians would have calculated that the risk to the rescue ships outweighed the potential benefit. The humans sent 6 ships. HFY watched in fascination and growing unease as the human pilots performed maneuvers that should have been impossible. They flew their ships like extensions of their own bodies, making split-second decisions that required not just skill, but an almost supernatural understanding of physics and probability. When the first rescue ship, the Valiant, suffered damage to its navigation systems while approaching the Endeavour, the pilot didn't retreat to safety. Instead, she manually piloted her ship through the asteroid field using only visual navigation and her own intuition, something that every flight manual in the galaxy explicitly warned against. "This is insane," muttered Commander Thex, a Zephyrian observer who had been assigned to monitor human activities. "They're going to lose more people than they save." But they didn't. Somehow, impossibly, all 6 rescue ships reached the Endeavour. The evacuation was completed with minutes to spare before the mining ship's orbit decayed completely, and it crashed into the larger asteroid. All 17 crew members were saved, and though 3 of the rescue ships suffered significant damage, not a single human life was lost in the operation. As the rescue miners were brought aboard Luna Station, ZYX Wrath observed the reunion between the survivors and their families. The emotional displays were intense. Tears of relief, embraces that seemed to go on forever, words of gratitude that were spoken in whispers, but somehow carried more weight than the mightiest oaths. "You see now why we couldn't leave them," Dr. Vasquez said, appearing beside him again. Those 17 people weren't just crew members of a mining ship. They were parents and children, siblings and friends, people with dreams and fears and hopes for the future. They were human. That's all the reason we needed. That night, ZYX Wrath sat in his quarters reviewing the recordings of the rescue operation. He studied the sensor data, analyzed the flight patterns, calculated the probabilities of success. By every rational measure, the rescue should have failed. The odds against success had been astronomical. Yet the humans had succeeded, and they had done so not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through something that ZYX Wrath was beginning to recognize as uniquely human, an absolute refusal to accept the unacceptable. He thought about Colonel Morrison's words about the end of the Third World War, about humans stopping their nuclear exchange, not through negotiation, but through a collective realization of what they stood to lose. He thought about the rescue operation, about humans risking everything to save people they might not even know personally. As he prepared his preliminary report for the Galactic Council, ZYX Wrath found himself struggling to find the right words to describe what he was observing. How did you explain a species that could simultaneously create weapons capable of destroying worlds and risk everything to save the lives of strangers? How did you categorize beings who seemed to operate according to principles that defied logical analysis? The humans were dangerous. That much was becoming clear. But their danger didn't come from aggression or malice. It came from something far more profound and unsettling: their complete unwillingness to abandon each other, even in the face of impossible odds. ZYX Wrath had come to Earth expecting to study another warlike species, perhaps one that could be controlled through careful diplomacy and strategic limitations. Instead, he was discovering something that challenged every assumption he had ever made about sentient behavior. The humans weren't just another species to be cataloged and filed away. They were something entirely new in his experience. A species that seemed to view the impossible as merely another problem to be solved, and the unthinkable as simply another challenge to be overcome. As he looked out at the Earth spinning slowly beneath Luna Station, ZYX Wrath realized that his research was just beginning, and for the first time in his long career, he wasn't sure he was prepared for what he might discover. 3 weeks into his research, ZYX Wrath received permission to visit Earth's surface. The Human Integration Committee had arranged for him to spend time in several major population centers, observing human society in its natural environment. Dr. Vasquez personally accompanied him on the shuttle descent, serving as both guide and cultural interpreter. "Earth is complex," she explained as their shuttle broke through the atmosphere. "We're not a unified species yet, not completely. We have different nations, cultures, belief systems. Sometimes those differences lead to conflict, but more often than not, they lead to innovation and growth." From orbit, Earth had appeared beautiful, but unremarkable, another blue-green world among thousands in the galaxy. Up close, however, ZYX Wrath could see the signs of human activity everywhere. Vast cities sprawled across continents, connected by transportation networks that pulsed with constant movement. The night side of the planet blazed with artificial light, creating patterns that were visible from space. Their first stop was Geneva, Switzerland, where the humans had established their primary center for interstellar relations. The city was ancient by human standards, its architecture spanning millennia of human development. Modern towers of glass and steel stood alongside stone buildings that had weathered centuries of human history. ZYX Wrath was struck by the energy of the place. Humans moved through the streets with purpose and urgency, but also with an underlying current of excitement. They were clearly aware that they stood at the threshold of a larger universe, and the prospect seemed to energize rather than frighten them. "The last 5 years have been transformative for us," explained Ambassador Patricia Walsh, the human representative to the Galactic Council. She was a woman in her 6th decade, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to have seen much of human history. "First contact changed everything. Our perspective on our place in the universe, our priorities as a species, our understanding of what's possible." She led them through the International Center for Galactic Relations, a facility that had been constructed specifically to house Earth's expanding diplomatic and research programs. The building hummed with activity as humans worked alongside representatives from a dozen different galactic species. "What impresses our galactic colleagues most," Ambassador Walsh continued, "is not our technology or our military capabilities, but our adaptability. We've gone from species that had never left our own solar system to one that's establishing research stations in 3 different star systems, all in less than 5 years." ZYX Wrath observed the human-alien work teams with growing fascination. The humans seemed completely at ease working with beings whose biology, psychology, and cultural backgrounds were entirely foreign to their own. They approached each interaction with curiosity rather than fear, asking questions, sharing ideas, building relationships across species barriers that had challenged galactic diplomats for centuries. "How do you do it?" he asked Ambassador Walsh during a break in their tour. "Most species require decades of cultural conditioning before they can work effectively with alien colleagues. Your people seem to adapt almost instinctively." The ambassador smiled, but there was something thoughtful in her expression. "I think it comes from our history, Dr. ZYX Wrath. Humans have always been explorers, wanderers. We've spent our entire existence adapting to new environments, meeting new peoples, learning to cooperate despite our differences. Working with alien species is just an extension of what we've always done." That afternoon, ZYX Wrath attended a joint research presentation where human scientists collaborated with their galactic counterparts on projects ranging from stellar engineering to quantum communications. The humans' contributions were notable not for their technical sophistication. Many galactic species had more advanced technology, but for their creativity and willingness to approach problems from entirely new angles. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a human physicist, was presenting her team's work on faster-than-light communication. The project involved technology that was primarily developed by the Altarian Collective, one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. But the humans had suggested modifications that the Altarians had never considered. The breakthrough came when we stopped thinking about quantum entanglement as a purely physical phenomenon, Dr. Tanaka explained to the mixed audience of human and alien scientists. "What if we treated it as an information relationship instead? What if the particles aren't just connected by physics, but by the meaning of the information they carry?" The suggestion was so simple that it bordered on naive, yet it had led to a 30% improvement in communication efficiency. The Altarian scientists were still trying to understand how humans had intuited a solution that had eluded their own researchers for centuries. After the presentation, ZYX Wrath spoke privately with Dr. Kellex, the lead Altarian researcher. The conversation was conducted through translation devices, as the Altarians communicated through complex electromagnetic patterns rather than sound. "The humans think differently than we do." Dr. Kellex's translated voice carried a note of what might have been admiration. "We approach problems through systematic analysis, building understanding layer by layer over extended periods. They seem to leap directly to solutions through processes we cannot analyze or replicate." "Is this concerning to you?" ZYX Wrath asked. "Concerning? No. Fascinating? Absolutely. They solve problems by refusing to accept that problems are unsolvable. It's a form of thinking that we find difficult to categorize." That evening, Dr. Vasquez took ZYX Wrath to dinner at a small restaurant overlooking Lake Geneva. The setting was peaceful, almost pastoral, yet ZYX Wrath found himself increasingly unsettled by what he had observed throughout the day. "There's something I need to understand," he said as they sat on the restaurant's terrace. watching the lights of the city reflect on the dark water. Your species adapts and innovates at a rate that seems almost impossible. You solve problems that stump civilizations far older and more technically advanced than your own. How? Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in her glass. That's a difficult question to answer, she said finally. But I think it comes down to something fundamental about human nature. We don't accept limitations very well. What do you mean? I mean that when someone tells us something is impossible, our first instinct isn't to accept that impossibility. It's to figure out how to make it possible. When we encounter a problem that has no solution, we don't mourn the lack of a solution. We create one. She gestured toward the city spread out below them. This entire civilization exists because our ancestors refused to accept the limitations of their environment. When they couldn't find food, they learned to grow it. When they couldn't cross oceans, they built ships. When they couldn't fly, they built machines that could. Every advance in human civilization has come from someone looking at an impossible problem and deciding it wasn't really impossible after all. ZYX Wrath felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. That level of persistence, it could be seen as admirable or dangerous, depending on one's perspective. Yes, Dr. Vasquez agreed quietly. It could. The next morning brought news that would fundamentally change ZYX Wrath's understanding of humanity. An emergency alert echoed through the Geneva facility as reports came in from the edge of human space. The exploration vessel Magellan had made contact with an unknown alien species, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. ZYX Wrath was granted permission to observe the crisis management response from the Human Command Center. What he witnessed over the following hours challenged every assumption he had made about human behavior under extreme stress. The initial contact had gone badly. The alien species, later designated as the hegemony, had interpreted human peaceful overtures as signs of weakness. They had disabled the Magellan and were demanding unconditional surrender from the human government, threatening to destroy the ship and its crew of 43 if their demands were not met within 12 hours. The hegemony's first communication to Earth was broadcast through the galactic emergency channels, ensuring that every species in local space could observe humanity's response. ZYX Wrath realized with growing unease that this was likely intentional. The hegemony wanted to make an example of the newest members of the galactic community. People of Earth, the hegemony commander's transmission crackled with barely contained aggression. Your vessel has trespassed in sovereign hegemony space. Your crew will be executed as spies unless your government formally surrenders all claims to interstellar territory and submits to hegemony authority. You have 12 hours to comply. The transmission included tactical data about hegemony military capabilities. They possessed a fleet of over 300 warships, many equipped with weapons that could crack planetary surfaces. Their technology was roughly equivalent to the galactic average, which meant they significantly outclassed human military forces. In the command center, ZYX Wrath watched human leaders digest this information with a calmness that he found deeply unsettling. There was no panic, no desperate scrambling for diplomatic solutions, no immediate capitulation to superior force. Instead, there was a focused intensity that reminded him uncomfortably of predators preparing to strike. Admiral Chun, the senior military commander present, studied the tactical data with the kind of attention that most species reserved for complex mathematical proofs. 43 people, she said quietly. 43 humans who are about to be murdered unless we do something about it. Admiral, interjected Ambassador Walsh, we need to consider the broader implications. A military response could trigger a war we cannot win. The hegemony outguns us by a factor of at least 10 to 1. Yes, Admiral Chin replied, her voice completely steady. They do. The way she said it made ZYX Wrath's breathing apparatus skip a cycle. There was something in the Admiral's tone that suggested the numerical disadvantage was merely another factor to be considered, not an insurmountable obstacle. Over the next 6 hours, ZYX Wrath observed the human leadership develop what they called a response strategy. It wasn't really a plan in any conventional sense. It was more like controlled chaos, a framework within which individual human initiative could operate. The humans reached out through diplomatic channels to every major galactic power, requesting clarification of the legal status of the region where the Magellan had been captured. They activated their small but growing fleet of military vessels, ostensibly for defensive preparations. They initiated emergency protocols that mobilized civilian resources across human space. But, most unsettling of all, they began broadcasting on all frequencies a simple message. The hegemony has 43 of our people. We want them back. The message was repeated in every human language, in Standard Galactic, and in the mathematical languages used by nonverbal species. It wasn't a threat or a demand or a plea for help. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with the kind of certainty that suggested no other outcome was acceptable. ZYXWrath found himself thinking about the rescue operation he had witnessed at Luna Station, about humans refusing to accept that 17 lives were an acceptable loss. Now, he was watching them apply that same principle on an interstellar scale. "What are they going to do?" he asked Dr. Vasquez, who had joined him in the observation area. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I know what they're not going to do. They're not going to abandon those 43 people. Not to save themselves, not to avoid a war, not for any reason. Those are humans out there, and that means we'll go to any length to bring them home." The hegemony's deadline was approaching when the first response came from the galactic community. The Altarian Collective issued a formal statement declaring the region of space in question to be disputed territory under galactic law, which meant that the hegemony's claim of sovereignty was questionable at best. Within an hour, 6 other major powers had issued similar statements. The peaceful Valdorians, who rarely involved themselves in military disputes, went so far as to deploy a humanitarian observation fleet to the edge of the contested region. ZYXWrath realized with growing amazement that the humans' simple message, "We want them back," had somehow triggered a massive diplomatic response. Species that normally required months of negotiation to reach consensus had aligned themselves with humanity in a matter of hours. "How did they do that?" he asked Dr. Vasquez. "They told the truth," she replied. "No hidden agendas, no complex diplomatic maneuvering, no calculations about gain and loss. Just a simple statement. These are our people, and we want them back." Sometimes the simplest approach is the most effective. The hegemony commander's second transmission came with 2 hours remaining on their deadline. The aliens' demeanor had changed noticeably. The arrogant confidence had been replaced by something that might have been unease. "People of Earth, the galactic community's interference will not change our position. Your vessel remains in our custody, and our demands stand. Any attempt at military intervention will result in the immediate execution of your crew." But even as the transmission played, reports were coming in of hegemony fleet movements. Their ships were repositioning, adopting defensive formations rather than the aggressive postures they had maintained earlier. The arrival of galactic observation fleets had clearly made them reconsider their position. Admiral Chun studied the latest intelligence reports with the same focused intensity she had maintained throughout the crisis. "They're scared," she announced to the command center. They thought they were dealing with an isolated new species that they could intimidate without consequence. Instead, they discovered that humanity has friends, and those friends are watching. With 1 hour remaining on the deadline, the human response began. It wasn't the military assault that everyone expected, nor was it the diplomatic capitulation that the hegemony had demanded. Instead, it was something entirely unprecedented in galactic history. Every human ship in space, military, civilian, commercial, research, began moving toward the contested region. Not in attack formations or according to military doctrine, but simply moving in the same direction with the same obvious intent. Freighters altered course from trade routes. Passenger liners changed their destinations. Even individual human citizens in private spacecraft joined the growing migration. The sight of it on the tactical displays was both inspiring and terrifying. thousands of human vessels, most of them completely unarmed, converging on a region of space where they would face a superior military force. It wasn't a military response. It was something far more profound. "What are they doing?" demanded Commander Thex, the Zephyrian observer, his voice cracking with stress. "This is madness. They'll be slaughtered." Admiral Chun turned to face the command center, and, for a moment, ZYX-Wrath saw something in her eyes that made his entire species' evolutionary heritage scream warnings about apex predators. "Commander," the Admiral said quietly, "they have 43 of our people. We're going to get them back. All of them. If the hegemony want to fight, they can have one. But they should understand that they're not fighting a government or a military or even a planet. They're fighting humanity. All of it." The final transmission from the hegemony came with 30 minutes remaining on their deadline. The alien commander's image showed clear signs of stress, rapid breathing, dilated pupils, the unmistakable body language of a predator that had suddenly realized it was facing something much more dangerous than anticipated. "People of Earth," the transmission began, the earlier arrogance completely gone. "The hegemony recognizes that this situation has escalated beyond our original intentions. We are prepared to negotiate the release of your crew in exchange for appropriate territorial concessions." The response from Earth was immediate and came directly from Admiral Chun. "Commander, this is Admiral Chun of the Human Space Force. You have 30 minutes to release our people unharmed and withdraw from the region. That is not a negotiation. That is a statement of what's going to happen. And if we refuse..." Admiral Chen's smile was visible even through the subspace transmission, and it was the most terrifying expression ZYX-Wrath had ever seen on a sentient being's face. "Then, you'll discover what happens when you threaten humans. I promise you, Commander, that's not something you want to experience." 28 minutes later, the hegemony released the crew of the Magellan and withdrew their fleet from the disputed region. The crisis was over, resolved without a single shot being fired. But as ZYX-Wrath watched the celebration in the command center, he realized that everything he thought he understood about warfare, diplomacy, and interspecies relations had been fundamentally challenged. The humans hadn't won through superior firepower or advanced technology. They had won because they had demonstrated something that no other species in galactic history had ever shown: absolute, uncompromising determination to protect their own, regardless of the cost. As the command center began to return to normal operations, Dr. Vasquez approached ZYX-Wrath with an expression that was both sympathetic and knowing. "You're beginning to understand, aren't you?" she said quietly. "Understand what? Why we might be dangerous to some species, even though we have no intention of threatening anyone." ZYX-Wrath looked at the displays, showing thousands of human ships dispersing back to their original destinations. Ordinary civilians who have been prepared to face a superior military force for the sake of 43 people they had never met. "Yes," he said finally, "I'm beginning to understand." The weeks following the hegemony incident brought a flood of requests for information about humanity from across the galactic community. Species that had barely acknowledged the new arrivals suddenly wanted detailed reports on human capabilities, intentions, and potential threat levels. ZYX-Wrath found himself at the center of what was rapidly becoming the most closely watched first contact study in galactic history. The Galactic Council's response was swift and unprecedented. They dispatched additional research teams from 5 different species, each tasked with specific aspects of human analysis: military capabilities, economic potential, technological innovation, social structures, and psychological profiles. Every facet of human civilization was now under intense scrutiny. Dr. Vasquez met with ZYX-Wrath privately after the arrival of the additional research teams. Her manner was polite but direct, with an undertone that suggested she understood the implications of the increased attention. "Dr. ZYX-Wrath, I want to be clear about something," she said as they walked through the corridors of the Geneva facility. "We welcome the galactic community's interest in our species. We want to be good neighbors and contributing members of the interstellar community. But We also want to make sure that interest doesn't become problematic. What do you mean by problematic? Dr. Vasquez stopped walking and turned to face him directly. I mean that we're aware some species might see us as a threat to be contained rather than a people to be welcomed. We're prepared for that possibility. The casual way she delivered what was essentially a warning made Zwayaxrath's skin crawl. There was no hostility in her voice, no aggression in her posture, but the implications of her words were unmistakable. Humanity was aware of the scrutiny and had drawn their own conclusions about its purpose. That afternoon, Zwayaxrath was granted access to classified human military installations. The tour was led by General Patricia Stone, the head of Human Space Command, a woman whose presence seemed to fill whatever room she entered. She was tall even by human standards, with gray hair cut in a practical style, and eyes that seemed to catalog everything around her for potential tactical advantage. Dr. Zwayaxrath, welcome to Luna Defense Complex, General Stone said as they entered the facility's main command center. We've been instructed to provide full transparency regarding our defensive capabilities. I hope you find the information useful for your report. The complex was built into the lunar surface itself, a vast underground network of command centers, weapon systems, and defensive installations. What struck Zwayaxrath immediately was not the technology. Most of it was relatively primitive by galactic standards, but the scale and organization of the facility. This complex was constructed in the 4 years since first contact, General Stone explained as they moved through the facility. When we realized we weren't alone in the universe, we also realized we needed to be prepared to defend ourselves if necessary. The defensive preparations were extensive and sobering. Long-range sensor arrays that could detect ship movements across multiple star systems. Weapon platforms that could target vessels in deep space. Shield generators that could protect Earth's major population centers from orbital bombardment. Most impressive of all were the manufacturing facilities that could produce military hardware at a rate that seemed almost impossible. Our defensive doctrine is simple, General Stone continued. We don't want a war with anyone. But if someone brings war to us, we want to make sure they regret that decision. Zwayaxrath studied the tactical displays showing the positions of human defensive assets throughout the solar system. General, these preparations suggest you expect to face threats significantly more advanced than your current technology level. We do. How do you plan to overcome such a technological disadvantage? General Stone's smile was sharp and cold. Dr. Zwayaxrath, humans have been fighting enemies with superior technology for our entire history. We've learned that technology isn't everything. Sometimes the willingness to accept unacceptable losses is more important than having the biggest guns. They toured the complex's training facilities, where human soldiers practice combat scenarios against simulated alien opponents. The training was intense, realistic, and designed around the assumption that human forces would always be outnumbered and outgunned. The soldiers adapted their tactics accordingly, emphasizing mobility, improvisation, and a willingness to take risks that most species would consider suicidal. Our personnel understand that any war we fight will be a war of survival, General Stone explained as they watched a training exercise. That changes the parameters of acceptable risk. When you're fighting for the survival of your species, conventional military doctrine becomes flexible. The most unsettling part of the tour came when General Stone showed him the facility's strategic planning center. Wall-sized displays showed detailed analyses of every major military power in the galaxy. Ship types, weapon capabilities, tactical doctrines, supply lines, command structures. The humans had compiled comprehensive intelligence on species they had never fought and hoped never to fight. This is remarkable, Zwayaxrath observed. You've developed detailed contingency plans for conflicts with powers that have shown you no hostility. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, General Stone replied. We learned a long time ago that the species that survives is the one that prepares for threats before they become immediate. As they concluded the tour, Zwayaxrath found himself profoundly disturbed by what he had observed. The humans weren't preparing for the kind of limited conflicts that characterized most galactic warfare. They were preparing for total war, conflicts where the survival of their species would be at stake. And they were preparing with a thoroughness that suggested such preparation was a normal part of their thinking. That evening, ZYX attended a cultural event that had been organized to showcase human artistic achievements. The venue was a concert hall in Geneva, where human musicians would perform alongside artists from several galactic species. It seemed like a harmless, even uplifting way to end a day that had left him questioning his understanding of human nature. The performance began with a piece by Valdorian composers, a haunting melody that captured the peaceful philosophy of their species. It was followed by a mathematical symphony created by the crystalline Zephyrians, music that existed more as pure pattern than emotional expression. Then came the human contribution. The piece was called Requiem for the Lost, composed by a human named Maria Santos in memory of those who had died in humanity's recent wars. The music began quietly, almost tentatively, with simple melodies that gradually built in complexity and emotional intensity. What happened next challenged every assumption ZYX had made about the relationship between art and aggression. The music wasn't just beautiful, it was transformative. As the composition progressed, he found himself experiencing emotions he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. The piece captured something fundamental about loss, sacrifice, and the determination to honor those who had given their lives for others. But it was the audience's response that truly unsettled him. The humans in the concert hall weren't just listening to the music, they were living it. Tears streamed down faces, hands reached out to comfort neighbors, and by the piece's conclusion, the entire human section of the audience was standing in a display of emotional unity that transcended individual identity. After the performance, ZYX spoke with the composer, Maria Santos, an elderly woman whose gentle demeanor seemed to contrast sharply with the power of her musical creation. "How do you reconcile it?" he asked her. "The capacity for such beauty alongside the preparations for such violence?" Maria considered his question carefully before answering. "I think you're misunderstanding something fundamental about humans, Dr. ZYX. We don't prepare for war because we love violence. We prepare for war because we love everything else. Our music, our art, our children, our dreams, all of it. And we'll do whatever is necessary to protect those things." She gestured toward the concert hall, where humans and aliens continued to mingle in the aftermath of the performance. That music exists because 17 million humans died in our recent wars. Every note, every harmony, every emotional moment, it's all built on the foundation of sacrifice. We create beauty from tragedy, hope from loss, determination from grief. Her words stayed with ZYX as he returned to his quarters that night. He was beginning to understand that human culture wasn't divided between peaceful and warlike aspects. Instead, their capacity for violence and their capacity for beauty were inextricably linked, two sides of the same fundamental drive to protect and preserve what they valued. The next phase of his research took him to Earth itself, where he would spend several weeks observing human society in its natural environment. The shuttle ride down from Luna Station gave him his first close look at the planet that had produced this remarkable and troubling species. From orbit, Earth looked deceptively peaceful. Blue oceans, green continents, swirling white clouds. It could have been any of 1,000 worlds across the galaxy. But as they descended through the atmosphere, the signs of human activity became impossible to ignore. Cities that stretched to the horizon, transportation networks that moved millions of people daily, industrial complexes that transformed raw materials into the tools of civilization. And underlying it all, the constant, restless energy that seemed to characterize everything humans did. His first stop was New York City, one of Earth's largest population centers. The experience of being among 8 million humans was overwhelming in ways he hadn't anticipated. The sheer scale of human activity, The constant movement and noise and interaction created an environment unlike anything he had encountered in his travels across the galaxy. Dr. Sarah Chun, a sociologist who had been assigned as his guide, met him at the spaceport. She was a descendant of the Captain Chun who had first escorted his research vessel to Luna Station, part of a family that seemed to exemplify humanity's rapid adaptation to interstellar civilization. New York can be overwhelming for visitors, she acknowledged as they made their way through the bustling spaceport. 8 million people living and working together in a relatively small area. It shouldn't work by any logical analysis, but somehow it does. The city was a maze of towering structures connected by transportation systems that operated with clockwork precision despite moving millions of people every day. What struck ZYX Wrath most forcefully was how humans had adapted their urban environment to accommodate non-human visitors. Atmospheric adaptation stations, gravity adjustment platforms, communication interfaces for species with different sensory capabilities. The modifications have been implemented with remarkable speed and efficiency. We learned early in our history that diversity makes us stronger, Dr. Chun explained as they rode an elevator to the top of one of the city's tallest buildings. Different perspectives, different approaches to problems, different ways of understanding the world. When we made contact with the galactic community, extending that principle to other species was natural. From the observation deck, ZYX Wrath could see the entire scope of human urban development. The city stretched in all directions, a testament to human ingenuity and organization. But what impressed him most was how rapidly they had integrated alien architecture and technology into their urban planning. This district was redesigned to accommodate Altarian vertical farming techniques. Dr. Chun pointed to a section of the city where towers seemed to glow with internal light. That area incorporates Zephyrian crystalline construction methods. And over there, you can see the first experimental Valdorian bioarchitectural projects. In less than 5 years since first contact, the humans had not only learned alien techniques, but had improved upon them. The Altarian farming towers were producing 30% more food than their original designs. The Zephyrian crystalline structures have been modified to provide better protection against Earth's weather patterns. The Valdorian bioarchitecture had been adapted to support human physiology while maintaining its environmental benefits. How do you innovate so quickly? ZYX Wrath asked. Dr. Chin smiled. We don't think of it as innovation, really. We think of it as survival. Every time we encounter a new challenge, whether it's feeding 8 million people in a limited space or adapting alien technology to human needs, we just figure it out. Because we have to. That afternoon, they visited a human school where children were learning alongside young members of several alien species. The sight of human children playing games with Altarian younglings and Valdorian saplings was both heartwarming and deeply unsettling. What disturbed ZYX Wrath wasn't the interaction itself, but how natural it seemed to the human children. They adapt so easily, he observed to Dr. Chun as they watched a mixed group of children solve a puzzle that required different species' unique sensory capabilities. Children are remarkable that way, she agreed. They haven't learned to fear difference yet. To them, having friends who communicate through electromagnetic patterns or who see in different spectrums isn't strange. It's just interesting. ZYX Wrath watched a human child of perhaps 8 years working with an Altarian youngling to build a complex, three-dimensional structure. The human provided spatial reasoning and manual dexterity, while the Altarian contributed electromagnetic field manipulation. Together, they accomplished something neither could have achieved alone. What happens when these children grow up? He asked. They become adults who see cooperation across species lines as normal, Dr. Chen replied. They become the foundation of a truly interstellar human civilization. The implications of what he was observing struck ZYX Wrath like a physical blow. Within a single generation, humans were producing individuals who could work seamlessly with alien species, who could adapt alien technologies to human purposes, who could think in terms of galactic rather than merely planetary civilization. That evening, Dr. Chun took him to a gathering that she described as a neighborhood committee meeting. The meeting was held in a community center that served one of New York's most diverse districts, where humans from dozens of different cultural backgrounds lived alongside visitors from several alien species. The agenda was mundane discussions about local transportation improvements, educational funding, and environmental protection measures. But Zwaxrath found himself fascinated by the dynamics of the meeting. Humans and aliens participated as equals, contributing different perspectives to common problems. When disagreements arose, they were resolved through discussion and compromise rather than dominance displays or appeals to authority. "This is remarkable," he whispered to Dr. Chun. "Most species require decades of careful diplomacy to achieve this level of cooperation. To us, this is just normal civic engagement," she whispered back. "We've been dealing with diversity and disagreement for thousands of years. Adding a few more species to the mix isn't fundamentally different from what we've always done." As the meeting progressed, Zwaxrath witnessed something that would haunt him for the rest of his research. A proposal was made to modify local atmospheric processors to better accommodate the needs of Zephyrian residents. The modification would require significant expense and would provide no direct benefit to the human population. The proposal passed unanimously. When Zwaxrath asked Dr. Chin about this later, her explanation was simple and terrifying. "There are neighbors. Neighbors help each other. That's how communities work." The casual way she described sacrificing resources for the benefit of alien residents crystallized something Zwaxrath had been struggling to understand about human nature. Their capacity for cooperation wasn't limited by species boundaries. They extended the same protective instincts they showed toward other humans to anyone they considered part of their community. As he prepared his reports that night, Zwaxrath realized that his research had taken a turn he hadn't anticipated. He had come to study a potentially dangerous species and determine appropriate containment strategies. Instead, he was documenting the emergence of something unprecedented in galactic history, a species capable of seamlessly integrating other civilizations into their own expansion while maintaining their core protective instincts. The humans weren't just adapting to galactic civilization. They were transforming it, creating new models of cooperation and integration that challenged every assumption the galactic community had made about interspecies relations. And they were doing it with a speed and efficiency that suggested this wasn't a careful, planned strategy. It was simply how they approached every new challenge, with determination, creativity, and an absolute refusal to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. For the first time since beginning his research, Zwaxrath found himself wondering not whether humanity posed a threat to galactic civilization, but whether galactic civilization was prepared for what humanity might become. The final phase of Zwaxrath's research began when emergency signals started arriving from the Kepler 442 system, where humanity had established their first permanent colony beyond Sol. The distress calls painted a picture of catastrophe. Massive earthquakes had devastated the primary settlement, killing hundreds and leaving thousands more trapped in collapsed structures. What followed was humanity's first major crisis response on an interstellar scale, and Zwaxrath was granted unprecedented access to observe their reaction. The Human Crisis Response Center in Geneva became a hub of activity as reports continued to arrive from the disaster zone. Current casualty estimates are over 400 confirmed dead, with nearly 2,000 missing, reported Commander Lisa Park, the lead coordinator for the response effort. The main habitat domes have suffered catastrophic structural failure, and seismic activity is ongoing. Admiral Chun, now serving as the head of interstellar operations, studied the incoming data with the same focused intensity Zwaxrath had observed during the hegemony crisis. "What's our response capacity?" "We have 12 ships within 3 days' travel of Kepler 442, Commander Park replied. "The problem is cargo capacity. Each ship can carry maybe 50 passengers and limited supplies. The colony has 8,000 residents. That's not enough," Admiral Chen stated flatly. What else do we have? What came next demonstrated something about human nature that would fundamentally change ZYX-Wrath's understanding of their species. Within hours of the disaster reports, every human ship in interstellar space began altering course toward Kepler 442. Not just military vessels or official rescue ships, but commercial freighters, passenger liners, research vessels, even private craft owned by individual citizens. The response was spontaneous and comprehensive. Ship captains canceled lucrative cargo runs, tourists abandoned vacation plans, and scientists interrupted critical research projects. The entire human merchant fleet essentially reorganized itself into a rescue armada without any central coordination or official authorization. How was this possible? ZYX Wrath asked Dr. Vasquez as they watched the tactical displays showing ship movements across human space. There's been no government order, no official mobilization. How did all these vessels know to respond? They didn't need to be told, Dr. Vasquez replied. 8,000 humans are in danger. That's all the authorization anyone needed. The scale of the response grew as more ships arrived in the Kepler 442 system. What had begun as a few dozen rescue vessels became a fleet of over 300 ships representing every aspect of human society. Cargo haulers brought prefabricated shelter units, medical ships brought trauma teams, and mobile hospitals and engineering vessels brought the heavy equipment needed for disaster recovery. But it wasn't just the scale of the response that impressed ZYX Wrath. It was the efficiency. Despite having no central command structure, the human ships organized themselves into working groups, established communication protocols, and began rescue operations with a coordination that seemed almost telepathic. This is unprecedented, observed Dr. Kellex, the Altarian researcher who had arrived to study human crisis response. Our species requires extensive planning and coordination to achieve this level of organized effort. How do they manage such complexity without central control? The answer came from watching individual human ship crews in action. Rather than waiting for orders from a central authority, each vessel assessed the situation independently and took whatever action seemed most appropriate. When problems arose, they were solved through direct communication between the affected parties rather than appeals to higher authority. It's like watching a hive mind that isn't actually a hive mind, Commander Thex, the Zephyrian observer, noted with obvious fascination. They're coordinating as if they share a collective consciousness, but they're clearly individual entities making independent decisions. The rescue operations themselves challenged every assumption ZYX Wrath had made about acceptable risk in crisis situations. Human rescue teams entered structures that were actively collapsing, worked in areas with ongoing seismic activity, and regularly put themselves in mortal danger to save people they had never met. One incident particularly exemplified this approach. A section of the main habitat dome had partially collapsed, trapping over 200 colonists in a pocket of debris. The safest approach would have been to wait for heavy equipment to clear the area systematically, but seismic sensors indicated that further collapse was imminent. Instead of waiting, a team of human engineers manually crawled through the unstable wreckage, establishing a human chain to pass survivors to safety one by one. The operation took 14 hours and required the rescue teams to work in conditions where a single aftershock could have buried them all. This is madness, declared Dr. Vextar, a hegemony military observer who had been assigned to study human crisis response. They're risking multiple lives to save individuals who may already be dead. It's tactically unsound. Admiral Chun, who is overseeing the rescue operations from the command ship, turned to address the alien observers directly. Dr. Vextar, you're evaluating this situation according to military logic, calculating acceptable losses against strategic gain. We're not conducting a military operation. We're saving our people. Those aren't the same thing. But the risk is irrelevant, Admiral Chen interrupted. Those are humans trapped in that wreckage. That means we go get them, regardless of the danger. It's not a calculation. It's who we are. All 200 trapped colonists were successfully rescued. The operation was completed with minutes to spare before a major aftershock brought down the remainder of the structure. None of the rescue team members were lost, though several were injured in the process. As the immediate rescue phase concluded, ZYX Wrath observed the beginning of the colony's reconstruction. The response was as impressive as the rescue effort had been. Ships began arriving with prefabricated buildings, power generation equipment, medical facilities, and all the other infrastructure needed to rebuild a functioning settlement. But what truly amazed him was the speed of the reconstruction. Within a week of the disaster, temporary housing had been established for all 8,000 colonists. Within a month, most of the colony's essential systems were operational again. Within 3 months, the settlement was not only fully functional, but had been expanded to accommodate additional residents. How do you rebuild so quickly? ZYX Wrath asked Dr. Martinez, the colony's chief administrator, as they toured the new facilities. Practice, she replied with dark humor. Humans have been dealing with disasters for our entire history. Natural disasters, wars, economic collapses, pandemics. We've learned to rebuild quickly because we've had to do it so many times. The reconstruction effort revealed another aspect of human nature that troubled ZYX Wrath. Rather than simply rebuilding what had been lost, the humans had improved upon their original design. The new habitat domes were stronger, the infrastructure was more resilient, and the entire settlement was better prepared for future seismic activity. We learned from our mistakes, Dr. Martinez explained when he commented on the improvements. Every disaster teaches us something about how to do things better. We don't just rebuild, we build back better. This pattern of improvement through crisis was, ZYX Wrath realized, fundamental to human civilization. Every challenge they faced became an opportunity to develop new capabilities. Every failure became the foundation for future success. It was adaptation on a scale and speed that seemed almost impossible. As his research period neared its end, ZYX Wrath found himself struggling to compile his observations into a coherent report. How did you categorize a species that seemed to defy every standard model of behavior? How did you assess the threat level of beings who could simultaneously show infinite compassion and infinite determination? His final interview was with an elderly human named Robert Shun, a philosopher and historian who had lived through First Contact and humanity's integration into galactic civilization. They met in a small cafe overlooking Lake Geneva, the same view where ZYX Wrath had first begun to understand the depths of human nature months earlier. Dr. ZYX Wrath, I understand you're struggling with your final assessment, Robert said, stirring sugar into his coffee with the slow deliberation of advanced age. Perhaps I can help you understand what you've observed. I'm not sure anyone can help me understand humans at this point, ZYX Wrath admitted. Every time I think I've grasped some aspect of your nature, I observe something that completely contradicts my previous conclusions. Robert laughed, a sound that carried decades of experience. That's because you're trying to understand us as if we're like other species. We're not. We're something new in your experience, and we don't fit into the categories you're used to using. Then, how should I categorize you? Don't, Robert replied simply. Describe what you've observed, report what you've learned, and let the council draw their own conclusions. But don't try to fit us into boxes that were designed for other species. As ZYX Wrath prepared to leave Earth, he found himself reflecting on Robert's advice. His research had revealed a species that was simultaneously inspiring and terrifying, capable of extraordinary compassion and extraordinary determination. They adapted to new challenges with impossible speed, integrated other species into their civilization as if it were the most natural thing in the galaxy, and refused to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. Most unsettling of all, they did these things not through careful planning or systematic analysis, but through an intuitive understanding of survival that seemed to operate at a level below conscious thought. They weren't trying to be dangerous or impressive or remarkable. They were simply being human, and the result was something that challenged every assumption the galactic community had made about the nature of sentient behavior. The flight back to the Galactic Council headquarters took 3 weeks, giving ZYX time to complete his report. The document grew to over 2,000 pages, covering every aspect of human behavior he had observed. But as he reviewed the final draft, he realized that the most important information couldn't be captured in clinical analysis or statistical data. The truth about humanity was simpler and more complex than any formal assessment could convey. They were a species that refused to abandon each other, regardless of the cost. They were beings who treated the impossible as merely another problem to be solved. They were creatures who could adapt to any challenge, and who included anyone willing to adapt alongside them. Most importantly, they were a species whose defining characteristic wasn't their technology or their military capabilities or their rapid expansion. It was their absolute, uncompromising commitment to the principle that every life had value and every problem had a solution. The formal presentation of his findings to the Galactic Council was scheduled for immediately upon his return. The Great Chamber was filled with representatives from every major galactic power, all eager to hear his assessment of humanity's long-term potential and threat level. ZYX stood before the assembled delegates, his formal report displayed on holographic screens throughout the chamber. But as he began to speak, he found himself departing from his prepared remarks. "Honored delegates," he began, "I was sent to Earth to assess whether humanity represents a threat to galactic civilization. After 6 months of intensive study, I can provide you with a definitive answer to that question." The chamber fell silent, every being present focused on his next words. "Yes," he continued, "humanity represents a threat to galactic civilization as we know it. But not in the way you might expect." Murmurs of concern rippled through the assembly. They are not a military threat in any conventional sense. Their weapons technology is inferior to most galactic powers, their fleet is small, and their military doctrine is based on defensive rather than aggressive principles. The murmurs quieted as the delegates tried to understand where his assessment was leading. The threat they represent is far more profound. They threaten to change everything we think we know about the nature of interstellar civilization. They integrate other species into their society as if species barriers don't exist. They solve problems that have stymied galactic science for centuries. They refuse to accept that any individual is expendable or that any challenge is truly impossible. ZYX paused, looking around the chamber at representatives of dozens of different species, most of whom had never experienced anything like what he was describing. In short, delegates, humanity threatens to make us all better than we are. They threaten to show us new ways of thinking, new approaches to problem solving, new models of cooperation and integration. They threaten to drag galactic civilization into a future that none of us have imagined, but all of us might benefit from. The silence in the chamber was absolute. My recommendation is that we embrace this threat. We should integrate humanity into galactic civilization as quickly and completely as possible. Not because they need us, but because we need them. They represent something genuinely new in galactic history, a species that makes everyone around them more than they were before. The debate that followed ZYX presentation lasted for days. Some delegates argued for caution, others for immediate integration, and a few for careful monitoring and gradual exposure to galactic civilization. In the end, the Council voted for full integration, with humanity granted immediate membership and full access to galactic technology and resources. The decision was announced to great fanfare across the galaxy, but ZYX found himself wondering if the Council truly understood what they had voted for. They had invited humanity to join galactic civilization, but they hadn't realized that humanity's presence would fundamentally change what galactic civilization meant. Years later, as ZYX watched human-led expeditions push the boundaries of known space, saw human innovations revolutionize galactic technology, and observed human values gradually reshape interstellar society, he realized that his assessment had been both completely accurate and utterly inadequate. He had discovered true terror while standing among humans. Not the terror of facing a superior predator or an overwhelming military force, but the terror of realizing that everything you thought you knew about the universe was about to change. The humans had kept their promise. They had been good neighbors and contributing members of the galactic community. But in doing so, they had transformed what it meant to be part of that community. They had shown the galaxy new possibilities for cooperation, integration, and mutual support that went beyond what any species had previously imagined. The terror Zhuaixraf had discovered wasn't about what humans might do to the galaxy. It was about what they would inspire the galaxy to become. And as he watched that transformation unfold, he realized that despite his fear of the unknown future that awaited them all, he wouldn't have it any other way. Humanity had arrived among the stars, and nothing would ever be the same.